Hi, my name is Anna, and I am presenting today on extinction, which is basically making undesirable behaviors disappear like the dinosaurs. So just a couple of things to keep in mind regarding extinction. You'll always want to start with a functional behavior analysis and having a really firm understanding of antecedents, behaviors, and consequences because we're trying to extinguish the behavior by um, getting rid of the preferred consequence, which I'll explain a little bit later. Um, the goal of extinction is really to eliminate the non-desirable behaviors through prompts and selective reinforcement. So you're only going to reinforce the positive behavior that you're seeing out of the child. Extinction really targets consequences and eliminates the behavior by getting rid of the consequence that follows. You'll see later, Henry, our case study, he screams in order to leave the classroom. And so the consequence is no longer going to be leaving the classroom. The consequence is you still have to do your ELA work, which is what he struggles with. And then fidelity is like super, super important because if the kid learns, oh, well, with, these people, I can still scream, or I still, get to leave the class, or I still get what I want, um, that is not going to fully eliminate, which is the goal, the behavior. And so the child can still learn the loopholes through that. There's three key steps, and then I have some extra thoughts and notes. The first step to extinction is just to determine the cause of the behavior, and then identifying the consequence, and then what redirections and prompts you're having. It's also really important, not just with extinction, but with any behavioral plan, to really think about what's going to happen if the behavior turns harmful or dangerous towards the student or others. And this is called a crisis plan. It might not ever have to be used, but it's better to have it and not use it than to not have it at all. The second step is just going to be putting it to use by eliminating that undesirable behavior and then reinforcing the positive behavior. And once you start seeing success, you really want to start fading those prompts out so they don't become prompt dependent because if the prompt that works for this child is a vocal cue of, man, I feel mad by, the adult, or some sensory input or a visual schedule, that's not really going to work if that's not available to them. And we want them to be able to regulate and use this new behavior anytime needed. The third one is just to keep really specific data about reinforcement and their behaviors, the non-desirable behaviors, and then what happens like before and after, all of that good information. And then this can also help if the student has voluntary recovery of the undesirable behavior, which is also called an extinction burst, where you were seeing like the non-desirable behavior decrease. And then all of a sudden there's like a spike, and it's like, whoa, we're trying these things again. That's kind of what that burst is talking about. But when those do happen, they're often not short, or they are often short-lived. And it's important to reinforce the positive behaviors like you were doing at the beginning. And then I think with most behavioral interventions, additional EBPs and team members may be needed. I've already mentioned visual schedules or sensory supports that might be more common to see in tandem with extinction than rather than just extinction alone. In terms of target population, extinction really does just work best for children whose behaviors are not harmful to themselves or others, because you're kind of waiting that behavior out and getting to the other side. If that behavior is like throwing chairs, you obviously don't really want to like let that go on for as long as possible. And then in diverse populations, it is always important to consider parents' abilities or just to implement with fidelity and the expectations from intervention. I feel like parent involvement was really um, pretty emphasized throughout the module, the Affirm module. So just understanding that not all parents have 110% to give to their child. And I would say all parents don't have 110% to give to their child all the time. Um, so just keeping that in mind. In terms of what research was given in the Steinbrenner article, 25 total studies were listed, and really most of those were case studies of just 1 to 3 children. One of the studies I looked at was a study of triplets, but most of them were pretty small groups, which makes sense. You're not really going to be able to apply extinction to 25 different kids at a time because 25 kids are going to have 25 different motivations for a behavior. In terms of what areas it looked at social and joint attention for the 6 to 14-year-old age range, communication, challenging behaviors, and adaptive or self-help skills were researched on all ages, which I think is great because especially as you get into that adolescent age, I feel like behaviors aren't as much of a focus, but they can still definitely exist. And then school readiness was researched on 0 to 15-year-olds. My 5 studies that I chose to take a deeper look at were all case studies. The first one, Gail, Ikeseth, and Rudrud, found that questionnaires can be helpful in gathering data. I feel like, especially with parents, this can be really helpful. Reeves et al. Discovered that the function-based intervention prevents classroom removal, which can be really big for the client's self-esteem, their developmental like milestones, and just the importance that playing and interacting with same age peers brings to a kid. And then also I feel like the parent morale is a little bit higher if we can keep kids in their least restrictive environment for all day long. I feel like that's important to kids and is important to Henry's parents. You'll see in a little bit. My third study just emphasized the importance of implementing extinction fidelity, like we've already talked about. Lolly found that implementation techniques are still beneficial in older children, like we said earlier. Um, Behaviors happen for all ages, and so it's important that we're not just focusing on the like birth to 5 range and how do we implement behavior modification with really tiny kids, but also still adolescents. And then my fifth and final study just shows that research shows that extinction is effective in reducing behaviors, which is great. We want to choose intervention approaches that work and are evidence-based. So this is Henry. Henry is 8, and he has autism. He was diagnosed at 310. Currently, when he screams during ELA lessons, the teacher will send him outside of the classroom to calm down with a trusted adult. Henry's interests include Disney movies, riding his bike, and his swim team. He excels in science and does well in math, but he really does avoid ELA lessons. And then his parents just really want him to stay in the classroom for the ELA lessons for the week. And they're worried that his behaviors will only get worse as he gets older. Henry has some goals. His long term, which is very general and broad. Henry will independently use an appropriate voice indoors throughout the day. I wrote this broad that way if he decides to generalize behaviors to other parts of the day, we can still work on those parts. And it's not like having to set up a whole new goal system. His goals kind of get harder as they go on. And first we're just working on that self-awareness, and then we're gonna go and just give him a 2-minute goal to go without screaming during an ELA lesson. And then his hardest goal is for 5 minutes. He'll maintain an appropriate volume with moderate cueing. I wrote it with moderate cueing. That way, if he has to do it with moderate cueing, he can. Ideally, I'd like to shoot for minimal cueing, but I decided to write the goals more general. That way, if we still need to work on them some, we can. These goals were all written by, or like with the view that they're starting like in August when we start school year. This is our data collection sheet. So you can see that from 11:05 to 11:10, the antecedent was that the teacher requested a transition away from math and into ELA. And then he started screaming, I don't wanna, I'm not doing it, and I'm not reading at a screaming level for 5 minutes. And then the student remained in the classroom and was reminded of objectives and timeline to next activity. In terms of data taking, you are going to really have anybody that can be consistent is the goal. But anybody like a parapro or a teacher or another professional can take data as long as they're kind of trained and in the know of what's happening. They are more than welcome to take data. The duration of his screaming is what's being measured, so we need to accurately document that. And then, like I said, documentation is going to happen during ELA lessons and in the classroom. And then using a systematic data sheet will ensure reliable and efficient note taking, which can help generalization and continuity of care. So, in terms of like actually what this looks like with Henry, you're going to be inside the classroom during ELA time. The interventionist is the primary person, but teachers and parents and paras can also all collaborate and really work together to ensure that Henry is getting the best care that he can. Data collection sheets, and then appropriate sensory tools. If you need some sensory help to regulate, that can be really helpful. And then I said it would also be helpful to have an ELA lesson worksheet and to have two so that the adult can model. And then generalization opportunities can happen while doing homework at home with the parents. So in terms of what this looks like or like steps in an actual session, um, arriving just before the transition or just before the transition into ELA can be helpful. And then it's important to not reinforce. And then the prompts for Henry I chose were I need help, I don't like this, or this is hard. Henry should ideally use one of those phrases in the ID or in the event that he does not. You can model the appropriate language and behaviors, and then reminding Henry of timeline and objectives. Also, some sensory application might be helpful. And then if Henry uses an appropriate phrase, then reinforce with praise and help. Right now, he enjoys 5 minutes of a choice toy as a reward after finishing his work. Um, that is all I have for you today. And then these are my references. The last reference is just for the school picture. It's a fake child. But yeah, that's all I have. Thank you so much.